Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Grace Holland. Israel and Hamas reached a ceasefire deal Wednesday. Hundreds of Palestinian prisoners will go free, as well as 33 hostages held by Hamas. Since the fighting began 15 months ago, WRAL has been covering local perspectives. Today, we wanted to share some of that perspective with you and let our interviewees do it in their own words. NBC News reports North Carolina man Keith Siegel, a hostage in Gaza, is alive and expected to return home under this deal. WRAL's Ashley Rowe spoke to one of Siegel's childhood friends.
All right. First, you know the drill. Can you just first tell me your first and last name and the title that we can give you?
Alon Tal, a Israeli politician, presently visiting professor at Stanford University.
And a childhood friend of Keith Siegel.
Yes, and childhood friend of Keith Siegel.
When you first heard about the ceasefire deal, what was your initial reaction?
Well, I'm heartened. It's clear that what we have is basically what President Biden proposed in May, and I'm curious as to why it took so long to make this take place, but it's better than nothing. It's not ideal. It's going to take a long time. Let's see if it's actually implemented. It starts with only 33 hostages, but we have some sort of intimations that Keith might be among the first released, which would be wonderful, but they all 98 need to come home, dead or alive.
And when you think about that, it's been 467 days since this war started, 467 days since Keith has been in captivity as his childhood friend, what goes through your mind?
Well, I mean, he's a very easygoing, centered and grounded human being. But to be in darkness, presumably, for so many months, and who knows what kind of physical deprivations or torture he's made, I firstly hope that his head and his heart are intact. His wife, Aviva, has been out for some time and she's been working tirelessly, but the conditions she described that she faced with him seem to be things that would challenge anybody to maintain their sanity. So I really hope that he comes back with his spirit intact and can come back and be the kind of person he always was.
Before we get into the political side of things, because I do want to get your take on a few of that on that angle. What else should folks here in North Carolina be watching as this ceasefire deal gets implemented, and as a North Carolinian native is potentially going to be released?
Well, I think that what we've seen in the last year and a half is the beginnings of maybe a new order within the Middle East. And the United States is somewhat ambivalent. They've been a phenomenal ally of Israel over the years, but there is a sense that because the Middle East is so difficult to engage in and to make progress in them, maybe they're not. But the Middle East keeps knocking on the American door, if it's through jihadists who come to America and attack citizens, or just in general to see the American fleet fighting the Houthi, insurgents in Yemen. And so I would like to hope that this gives Americans a sense that progress can be made. Certainly, we saw what happened in Syria after so many years. A despotic and horrible regime is replaced. We don't know with what. But I think that Keith coming home is a symbol that, wars are ugly and they're bloody, and there's been tremendous loss of lives and suffering in Gaza, and I do not want to belittle that. But sometimes when there are evil forces, that's just what it takes. You have to get the boots on the ground and do what it takes so that in the long term, you can have progress. And of course, the natural metaphor is World War II, when it took to uproot a horrible Nazi government. And the price civilians paid, the soldiers paid, but in the end, Europe had 80 years of quiet since then.
Let's assume you have the opportunity in the near future to speak with Keith. What will you first want to say to him?
Well, first of all, I'll ask him how he feels and his health and whether he came out of it physically intact. But I'll tell him that he was, he first of all is somebody who always was very reserved and did not seek attention. He's world famous. I mean, his name is plastered all over the country, and I think as a cause célèbre. But I'll certainly comfort his mother, who's passed away in the meanwhile. She was a tremendous woman, and really up to the end, a powerhouse and a picture of, well, just a civic asset. And so we all will miss her, and I'll comfort him. And I think we'll lapse into a lot of nostalgia about her, because once this kind of thing happens, you begin to appreciate somebody more, and then you go back to think about the memories together, and we have a lot.
Let's talk about the road ahead and your confidence in this implementation being fully done, all of the phases getting done. You have a lot of experience as a politician in Israel. So from that lens, what are your thoughts?
Well, Hamas is a cynical and bloodthirsty organization. So to say that I'm confident they will uh, meet their commitments is, I'm not. I'm hopeful. Um, I would not at all be surprised if anything falls apart, or even if it does, the first stage is completed and they back off on the others. So it's very disheartening, I think, to see what's happened in Gaza, because Israel, of course, has, through very, very difficult battles with this terrorist organization, killed thousands of Hamas fighters. But because they still control the food and the money there, they've managed to recruit a lot of people back. And what do you want from a 17-year-old Gazan who wants to try to, feed his family who's starving? And the only way to get anything for them is to go back. And so they've replaced a lot of their fighters with other people. And I think what we all have to realize is we need an end game for the people of Gaza. They deserve a democratic, open, compassionate, non, fundamentalist Islamic government that would lead them to a better future. So I think that's what we have to hope for, that we don't find ourselves in a continuous loop of attacks and whatever. And this was supposed to prevent that. I surely hope it does.
Do you believe that there can be a two-state solution?
I have always believed there can be a two-state solution. To some extent, it's a rhetorical thing. I think in the initial stages, it might have to be a demilitarized state. But let's remember that after World War II, Japan and Germany lived for quite a while and flourished without having a military. And I think the Palestinians would do well to learn from that and say, if they really want to improve their economy, build the infrastructure they need to have a modern society, they should give up building huge military infrastructures and tunnels of death and the like, and care and invest in their people. And if they're willing to do that, I definitely think we can move to a situation where the Palestinians enjoy self-determination and Israel can live with security. I don't think that's a pipe dream. There's no reason why we can't do it.
When was the last time you spoke with Aviva?
Oh, I haven't been in touch with she got out because she's been rather, she steps forward when she needs to for the press, but she's with her children and grandchildren. I'm in touch with his brother Lee on a constant basis, and he's doing what he can. It's tough for the whole family.
Yeah. Have you had a chance to chat with his brother today?
I have not, but at your suggestion, I'm going to send him a text as soon as we finish.
Please,
Yeah.
please relay what the message is, if you don't mind,
I'll tell him
when you
WRAL
communicate.
says hi.
Yes, yes, exactly. And if there's anything that he wants to pass along, I know our viewers would like to hear. Hey, I appreciate it. Is there anything else that you want to mention just about today's development, the potential that Keith is going to be released again to a North Carolina audience?
Sure. I think that there's no question that this very, very important development and the ceasefire and the return of hostages, to no small extent, is due to the intervention of the American administration. I want to thank President Biden. I want to thank incoming President Trump. I don't think there's any coalitional divide on this particular issue. That both of them have been very, very forceful about the importance of getting this deal done. And thank God we can do that. We can give thanks that may be a small step forward for peace and progress in our troubled region.
When we come back, local representatives whose constituents lost family in Gaza. We also spoke with Durham County Commissioner Nida Alam, the first Muslim woman ever elected to public office in our state. She says some of her constituents lost family members in the Israeli counterattacks. Here's her perspective.
Thank you so much for doing this. I actually immediately thought of you when we were hearing rumblings of the deal, because I just remembered, you like bravely talking about, how you were very direct with Vice President Harris. And so I just wanted to know generally what you think of this ceasefire deal. What was your reaction when you found out, when you heard, Qatari officials say, indeed, they've come to a deal. Obviously, they're from Netanyahu. He's saying, that we have to be careful. I mean, there's lots of qualifications around this
Yeah.
said deal, but still, I mean, this is major progress. So what was your reaction?
I think like most people, there's this sense of relief, uh, that there was going to be an end to this 15 million year. Oh my God, I'm going to start over.
Yeah,
15
yeah,
million
yeah, yeah.
years.
Sure.
That's what it felt
Let's
like.
start from the beginning. What was your reaction when you heard about this deal?
I think there's been, like most people, a huge sense of relief that after 15 months of devastation, that there's finally going to be a pause, that there's finally going to be a moment of relief for Palestinians, that there's going to be a release of the hostages. I think there's also, like reading through the deal, also still some angst that there's three phases to this deal, and really hoping and praying that all three phases move forward.
In the initial phase, it does seem that there will be significant humanitarian aid that gets to Gaza. But what do you think about that?
I think it's about time. I mean, we've seen that Palestinians and Gazans have been cut off from humanitarian aid. We have seen like their children currently freezing to death in Gaza because of the winter temperatures and no access to warm clothes, no access to heaters. So it's really coming at any point that this could have come at would have been a critical point, but especially in this colder weather. And I think now that the humanitarian aid is going to be able to go in, and with journalists actually being able to go in and reporters, this is the moment that we're actually going to be able to see the true devastation. Because we've been able to see just snippets of what the Palestinian journalists who have very limited resources and are on constant bombardment themselves have been able to release. But now, when we have international media being able to come in and look at 92% of the population in Gaza is displaced, we'll actually get to learn what is the true number of people who have been killed, what is the true number of children who are now orphaned, the wives and husbands who are now widows, how many people in Gaza are now amputees, because all of these are individual stories that haven't been heard and seen, and now we're going to start to see that true human life that's been impacted by this war.
What was your message to Vice President Harris when you got to meet with her?
When I got to meet with her, I was invited as chair of the county commission to greet her to Durham, and my message to her was that, this is an issue that North Carolinians care about, that, we all care about, that it's our taxpayer dollars that is funding this war. And, I had my son with me because I shared with her, I said, my son now is 8 months old. The children of Gaza who are being under bombardment are his size or smaller. And for her to be able to see, like, what makes my son more special or more valuable than their lives. Like, I love him dearly, but also I know I look at him and I feel pain because there's mothers and fathers in Gaza who are burying their children the size of my son, who are trying to find formula, milk, diapers for their children that aren't the size of my children. And, to be able to share with her that perspective of like, I constantly work with like the Mothers for Ceasefire, mothers who organize for our collective shared grief that we have for the parents who are losing their children, for the children who are now orphans.
What does it mean to you that the deal did get done under her and President Biden?
I think, I'm grateful that the deal is done. I think it's also important for us to recognize that even with this deal is done now, that there's still been 15 months of devastation. And over those 15 months, there have been tens of thousands, I believe over 40,000 that we know of, lives that have been lost, that we're never going to get back. And I think that we, as a country, need to sit down and reflect on the role that we played in this devastation. Because when I see, these children who are now amputees, these mothers who had to go through C-sections like I did, but they were undergoing a C-section with no anesthesia, with no medication, while they hear bombs going off outside the hospital, not knowing if the hospital that they're in right now is going to get bombed. Like, I hear all of those stories and I see them, and all I can think is that our taxpayer dollars funded this. And I believe like we as a country have to really sit with that. And we need to take a stronger look at how our policies allowed this to happen.
What's your biggest, I guess, fear moving forward with this deal?
I think my biggest fear is, I mean, as I mentioned, it's 3 phases. I'm hoping and praying that all 3 phases, are followed through. And even though the ceasefire deal, like it goes into place in a few days, I'm also still worried about the days leading up to that ceasefire, the start date. What type of devastation is going to fall? We see that there's still bombs falling on Gaza now, even though the deal has been reached because the start date of it hasn't come. I'm fearful of what these few days mean before the start. I'm fearful of, especially in the third stage where it's going to be the rebuilding of Gaza, of how that's going to happen because we need to support and rebuild Gaza and provide the 92% of the population that's been displaced. They've lost their homes, they've lost their memories, they've lost everything. And it's not just their homes, their livelihood of their farms have been burnt down. How are they gonna support their families if, so many olive groves have been burnt down, their water sources have been cut off. And so building that whole infrastructure up and helping folks overcome the trauma and the grief of the family members they've lost through this process.
I know I mean, as you said, we only have had a glimpse into the full destruction in Gaza. So to even begin to plan and look ahead, you got to know what you're getting into before you're able to do that. But what is the next phase for people like you, for activists, for those who are so concerned for the people in Gaza? What do you hope will happen, and what are you hoping the Trump administration will do to support the people there in Gaza?
I think what we need to see is, from the ceasefire deal that I had seen, it said that there was going to be 600 trucks coming in every day with relief. We need to make sure that those 600 trucks are actually coming in. And if those 600 aren't enough, advocating for more. Um, we need to make sure that we're advocating at the federal level for funding to especially rebuild the healthcare systems because, now there's going to be a ceasefire, but there's so many injured people. There's so many people with life-changing injuries that there's no hospitals to support them and care for them. We as an international community need to figure out how we're going to support medical refugees that need help and medical care to be able to live uh, the rest of their lives in a healthy condition, as healthy as we can provide them. I think for myself and like other organizers, especially the mothers that I often talk to through Mothers for Ceasefire, is just advocating for for the children, but also for the parents, because there's no a lot of times people talk about children losing their parents, but there's like as a mother of two, I can't imagine the pain of losing my children. And there's so many parents in Gaza who are going to be living every single day without their child. And when there needs to be systems of support for them.
Anything else you'd like to share about? I see you getting emotional. I mean, the full magnitude, we just don't know. Anything else you'd like to share about your reaction about this deal?
I think it's important for all of us, even with an hopeful end to this war through the ceasefire, to keep our eyes on Gaza. We can't just just because the war is, ended, that we can't just forget about Palestine. We can't just forget about Gaza because there are people they need to rebuild. They need to rebuild their entire lives while they're still grieving. And we need to be there to advocate for them. We need to be there to have this reflection as a country about how we allowed this to happen. Um, and it's going to also take a lot of unity amongst all of our communities, across interfaith communities, cross racial communities. Like, it's going to take all of us to really stand up and advocate for Palestinians.
Do you have a fear that once the hostages are all released, that the U.S. will say, okay, we're done?
I think there's always that fear. Um, but I believe, I have strong faith in us as activists, as organizers, to make sure that we raise our voices and we organize and we protest and speak up if that were to happen, because there's no way that, morally, I cannot see we how it would be acceptable for us as a nation to allow that to happen.
Thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.